Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track, in which this one we're looking at another subscriber's loco. In this episode we're going to be looking at a chap called Tom's EMD F7 A and B units in Erie Lackawanna colours, and if I've said that wrong I apologise, and they are American diesels from the 1960s. Opening the box there, you can see there was a small post-it with some information about the real locos on, and the locos themselves look to be in very good condition. The wheels are clean and there doesn't appear to be any marks. The B unit is a cabless power unit which has also got a motor in, so I assume in American terms this is almost the same as double heading but only utilising one crew, hence the A and B unit definitions. These models are really in quite good condition, so it'll be interesting to see what they are like mechanically, and there's either a driver and second man fitted in this A unit. Now, Tom has told me that this doesn't work. The lights light up, but the actual train doesn't run. Doing the battery test, you can see there that the light is working, but as he said, there's no power. So this A unit's going to need a total strip down to have a look at what the problem is. Now we're going to test the B unit. This is a little bit harder to remedy, as there's no light to show any sort of power indication. But again, the battery test, this proves to be dead as well. So we're going to have to strip both of these units down and try and rectify the running issues. Putting the A unit into my loco cradle, all there is two screws to remove with a small Phillips screwdriver. Once these are removed, the body comes off relatively easily. Just be careful on the A unit, as there is a coupling that protrudes through the front fender. Once the screws are removed, it becomes apparent that this die-cast chassis may have some issues. As can be seen there near my thumb, there is some signs of corrosion. I just shake the screws out there and I put them in my magnetic tin ready for later. And looking into the chassis there, it looks like there's a lot of corrosion in this, and I am initially worried that this might be the dreaded Mazak rot that affects certain models of a certain age, and that the die-cast chassis, if it has got Mazak rot, has virtually had it, and I won't be able to mend these locos. To remove the motor, you simply unscrew the two bottom screws, which also releases the fuel tank, and then the motor can be pushed up. You also have to unscrew the bogies. I've just noticed this unusual pickup arrangement here that picks track power up and feeds it directly onto the die-cast chassis, and then the other side picks up conventionally. I've never seen this on a model before. As you can see there, the dust off this corrosion was already getting everywhere and on my fingers. As I said, removing the two bogies, releasing the screws. These are standard Bachmann bogies and are not too dissimilar to those on my Class 20. And then pushing the flywheels, the motor just unclips. You will have to cut the wires to release the bogies, but this is no hassle, as it's a simple soldering job for later on. Once it was stripped down, you can see here the corrosion inside the body, which is where the motor picks up from. This is really worrying, and I think if both of these units have got this, we are in trouble with this one. So I simply snip the wires off the motor terminal there and free the motor. The bogies then drop out, and they are filthy in themselves. The amount of hardened grease on these is quite unbelievable, considering they're factory lubricated. Getting some power leads, I test the motor, and the motor runs fine, so I'm happy that the motor is salvageable if nothing else. They're standard Bachmann motors, and I do have some spare ones, as they appear to be the same as they use in their early Class 20 and Class 24 models. I do have quite a pool of spares when it comes to Bachmann motors from various locos I've salvaged over the years. Now I'm looking at this corrosion and I'm starting to worry, as I said, about Mazak rot. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to physically squeeze the chassis and try and expand it, because if this is Mazak rot, this chassis will crumble. But it doesn't. The chassis seems quite secure. So I'm going to unscrew this light fitting here, which also picks up power from the chassis block. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the chassis block in this plastic tub, and I'm going to use a wire brush on my Dremel multi-tool to clear away all the corrosion on the inside of this die-cast chassis. This was horrendously dusty, and I also wore a breathing mask for this. It simply got everywhere, despite trying to keep it contained within this tub. If you try this method, I recommend using eye protection as well. This method removed 90% of the build-up of this corrosion, but the parts of metal that had corroded where the motor picked up current from had been damaged badly, and we'll see later how I modify the motor to overcome this. This really is the dirtiest model I've ever had to work on. Look at all this dust in this tub, and this is just from one of the chassis blocks, and I've got two to do. You even got on the workbench, even though I did it in a tub. So here I am now trying to refit one of the motors to see if it will pick up power from the chassis block now that the corrosion has been cleared away. However, putting the crocodile clips on, the motor doesn't move at all, so the motor is still unable to pick up current from this chassis block. While I'm at it, I'm going to get the brass out and I'm going to clean the brass contacts on this motor, as they've been turned green by the corrosion. I went online onto the RM web forum and I was told that this isn't Mazak rot, this is damp corrosion. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark the flywheels with this red Sharpie marker so that you at home can see when the motor actually runs, because it's hard to see when you're filming if the brass flywheels are turning or not. And as you can see there, the motor works fine. So I'm testing it now on the chassis and it seems to work. I'm now going to investigate this B unit and see if this is suffering from the same corrosion. To keep all the parts separate, the parts for the B unit go into a plastic tub, not into the magnetic tray. And straight away you can see it is the same corrosion, and this one looks even worse than the A unit. I'm not surprised that this can't pick up any power if the inside is coated with this again. Stripping this motor down is exactly the same as the A unit, and here I am trying to test the motor with direct current through the chassis block, but it won't work. Even pushing it down onto the pickup, the motor is dead. The corrosion on the B unit was a lot worse, but this was cleared up in the same method using the wire brush in the Dremel in the plastic tub. This hole on the side here worried me slightly for a start, but when I checked this later on against the chassis block for the A unit, it seems to be a casting mark from when these were cast in the die casting machine. Testing the motor again, this time I'm going to put 2 red marks on this flywheel so I know that this motor came out of the B unit, and as you'll see, direct current there and the motor spins lovely. So the motors in these are fine, it's just they're preventing from picking current up due to that damp corrosion on the inside of these chassis blocks. The dust on this one has even got inside the motor, so I'll have to clean that out later too. This is the chassis block now that the corrosion has been cleaned off with the wire brush, and this hole here seems to be full of dust, but as I said, there is a similar hole on the A unit just there, so I assume this is a casting mark from when these were cast in the factory. Now that the chassis units have been cleaned, I give them a wipe over with a slightly damp towel and then set them aside to dry just to make sure that all the dust has been removed. I then give my workbench a thorough clean to get rid of all that dust. I'm now testing the B unit again, and again as before, nothing. It is not picking up from the chassis block. I do find this method of current collection really crude, and I would wish that Bachmann had put correct wiring into these locos. I'm just going to brush off any remnants of dust with this stiff brush, and then we'll move on to modifying these motors. What I'm going to do is I've got a short length of brass strip here, and I'm going to solder it onto the existing motor terminal and extend the pickup along the side of the body shell. This should extend the pickup beyond the corroded area and allow the motor to pick up current again from the chassis block itself. I'm not sure how long these chassis blocks are going to stay free of corrosion, and it is a worry. If you've got a good collection of these Bachmann USA locos, it may be worth checking these in the future. I'm just testing them here to make sure that solder joints are good, and then what we'll do is we'll reinsert them into the chassis blocks to see if my modification has worked. I'm just going to rotate the flywheels there so you can see the red mark, and as you can see there, it is starting to work. That is good news. So I tie it all over, and now we're on to the B unit, and again the motor works fine. So the modification to the motor pickup is working, and it's now picking up power beyond the corroded area. Next up, we're going to look at the bogies of these units, or trucks as the Americans call them, and I'm going to disassemble them to clear out all this hardened grease from the Bachmann factory. These bogies are assembled in exactly the same way as the Class 20 and Class 24 UK models, with the retaining clip unscrewed from the top. The drive shaft can be removed, and so can the worm gear. Removing the bogie plate releases the wheels, and then you can really get in and clean all this up. This is by far the dirtiest loco I've ever had to work on in my entire career of mending trains. The grease on this is phenomenal. The amount that is in this model is unreal. But it's getting on for 20 or even 30 years old now, and it is going solid. So it's putting extra strain on the motor and the drive shaft. So we need to clean it all out and reapply fresh lubrication. What I'm going to do, the grease is so bad that I'm going to put all the parts that have covered in grease, and I'm going to put them in this cleaned out tub, and I'm going to soak them in hot soapy water to soften the grease and then remove it with an old toothbrush. However, on this occasion I couldn't find an old toothbrush, so again, bit cheeky, but I went up to the bathroom and borrowed the wife's. One day she's going to catch me and I'm going to be in serious trouble. But until then, I think I'm safe, because I don't think she's Trash to Track's biggest fan. So here we are then, in the hot water. You can see, going gently not to burn my fingers, but all the grease has been removed from this bogie side frame already. So we're on to a winner. I have done this in the past to Bachmann models in the UK, but if you're unsure about putting your parts in the water, especially pickups and wires, then don't do it. It's not recommended if you're not experienced, as you can get parts wet that will ruin the model. Like I said, I've done this many times before, so if you're not sure, send it to a qualified repairer, or indeed, if you've got a model that needs mending, send it into Trash to Track and we'll see what we can do. So after about an hour's work on one set of bogies or trucks, this is what we're left with. Most of the grease has been removed and they're ready for reassembly and some fresh lubrication. Reassembling the trucks is quite simple. It is just a reverse of how we took them apart. I put in the brass worm gear and the bearings first, followed by the wheels, ensuring that the pickups are clipped in correctly, and then the top retaining clip goes in, and lastly the bogie side frames after lubrication has been added onto all the drive cogs in the gearbox and all the brass bearing pieces. As ever, when reassembling these models, never over tighten the screws, as you can break the plastic screw threads in them and then you really are in bother. So using my silicone grease I've got from Eileen's Emporium and a cocktail stick, I put a liberal amount in the gearbox and on all the gears. Who knows when this model will be next opened up, so I give plenty of lubrication, but I don't overdo it like they had done in the Bachmann factory. I also put some silicone grease onto the brass worm gear there, and then I also apply some modelling oil to the axles. Not that they're in brass bearings, but it always helps, and also along the gear train, so it mixes in with the silicone gel. Or silicone grease, I'm correct myself. I give the bogie side frames a quick dusting with a stiff brush to remove any dust remnants, and then clip it back in together, and the bogie is reassembled. This method is used for the other 3 trucks, or indeed bogies, that are there on this model. And then just a small bit of oil in each of the worm gear bearings, and we're good to start reassembling these bogies. Here all 4 bogies, after being washed and cleaned and re-lubricated, ready for refitting to the A and B units on this model. The more I work on this, the more I like this model. It is simple. It would be quite difficult, I think, to DCC, but I do like this American stuff. Right, first to reassemble is the motor, which clips in one way and has a foam cradle around it. Once that's clipped in, we can dust off the fuel tank and reapply that with the 2 screws that are in the metal tin. This holds the motor secure and holds the fuel tanks underneath. This only goes on one way, as there is a bridging piece there that will only allow it to fit on this die casting one way. Again, do not over tighten the screws, otherwise you will break the lugs off the motor mount. Now this is in, before we put the bogies on, I'm just testing the motor again, and all seems to still be working, so I'm happy we seem to have rectified that issue. I also test underneath where those pickups rub onto the die-cast chassis, just to ensure good electrical connectivity throughout the casting. To reassemble the bogies, the wires are put through a pre-cast hole in the chassis block with the wire pulled through, and then gently manipulating the drive shaft back into the brass flywheel on the motor, and then you replace the screw in the top of the bogie. Again, as I said, do not over tighten, because over tightening the screws that hold the bogies in place will actually prevent them from turning, and they will be rigid and straight. They won't run around your layout. I'm going to demonstrate that here. By tightening that screw up on that bogie, you'll see that it will not turn left or right. So you do not want to over tighten that. It is imperative. Just loosening it a quarter of a turn and it puts it to how it should be. The other bogie was reassembled the same way, and then all we have to do now is to reattach the wires to the solder tab on top of the motor, and this is for the B unit as there's no light unit or cab crew in this one. And by gently touching with a soldering iron, we have reconnected the wires and we're ready to test this. So we get the length of track out and we get the good old Duracell battery, and with a little trepidation I put the loco back on the track. As if this doesn't work, I really will be at a loss as to what we're doing. But hey ho, the corrosion cleanup and the motor modifications have reactivated the B unit at least into a running loco. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the A unit once we put that last piece of polystyrene in, and now that's ready for the body to be reassembled. Again, as before, it is a simple reverse of how we took it apart. It clips on either way as the screw holes line up, and then the two small Phillips screws are replaced and the B unit is all but done. Now we're with the A unit again, and as you can see there, those red marks disappear quickly as we're testing the chassis block. This one's also running fine, and I am really pleased with that. Using the crocodile clips there, initially it didn't work because I created my own short circuit, but it did run on all the pickups on the underneath. So we reapply the light bulb into the screw hole behind the driver there, and place the bulb in its holder at the front of the loco, and then solder the wire tabs back onto their corresponding tab on the motor there. And as you can see, I had to extend a wire on this one. And the A unit is also now in running order. The bogie reassembly on the A unit is exactly the same as that on the B unit, which is why I didn't bother filming it, as it's just repetition. The light guard clips in just like that on the front there and keeps the bulb in place. And now we're ready to refit the body shell. And again, the body shell goes on one way with the cab at the front where the drivers are. And again, be careful to manipulate the coupling through the front fender so that you don't break it off. Put in the two Phillips screws, and then we're almost ready to look at what we started with this model. Giving it a quick battery test, we can see there that the light's working again and the wheels are all turning. There is no turntable shot with this model this time, as there was no cosmetic difference at all. So we're going to go straight to this layout now and see them running around separately, as unfortunately there was no couplings present, so I couldn't couple these together. And they don't have standard NEM pockets. So here we have them both running around separately, just to prove that we have mended these and brought them back into function. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. The email address is in the description of the video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, or consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.